March Madness is in full swing as the Sweet 16 is already underway. Good afternoon and welcome to a Talking Points webisode. I'm Gilat Melamed. The college basketball world is still feeling the effects of the FBI investigation and the charges that were handed down in September. Here to discuss the effects of the FBI investigation months later and how the NCAA is moving forward are Talking Points analysts Brandon Ross and Justine Murray. Joining us from the sports department, we have Matthew Wieselthier. Guys, thanks so much for joining me. And Brandon, I want to start with you. Can you just give the viewers a little refresher on the background of this investigation?
Yeah, so back in September of last year is when the entire investigation began to heat up. 4 assistant basketball coaches were arrested. And as the investigation has gone along, we've seen they've broadened the scope, and it's now including multiple investigations into how sports agencies are funneling money, possibly through assistant coaches, and either sometimes directly to the players and their families, certain impermissible benefits.
When those charges were brought down, the federal prosecutor had some strong words. He said, month after month, the defendants exploited the hoop dreams of student athletes around the country, allegedly treating them as little more than opportunities to enrich themselves through bribery and fraud schemes. So how does this case, from a legal standpoint, differ from some other NCAA investigations we've seen in the past?
So obviously the FBI doesn't usually look into college athletics on a routine basis, but in this case, since the assistant coaches in questions are employees of federally funded institutions, taking bribes for certain things is considered a federal offense.
And this isn't the first time that the FBI has really taken a look at an NCAA investigation. One that really sticks out is North Carolina giving out fake classes to student athletes in particular, and the FBI came down and said you can't do that. Well, the NCAA ended up not giving out any charges for this, and the main reason for that is that these fake classes were given out to not just student athletes, therefore the NCAA could not give out any charges for that.
And North Carolina was one of those teams in the tournament, so did this investigation have any other implications in the tournament? It didn't affect North Carolina, but...
No, it did not affect North Carolina, and a few people think that some teams are underseeded. You can see some of the teams that were left out of the tournament. 3 ones that really stick out are USC, Louisville, and Oklahoma State. And for those 3 teams, they were right on the bubble being just the last teams that got into the tournament. And for USC, it was a case of they had a week out of conference schedule. That was big for the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee this year. Louisville had no top 50 wins in the country. Generally, you want to have one of those if you want to make the NCAA tournament. And for Oklahoma State, it was very weak strength of schedule. But you can see so many teams on that list. Kentucky, given a 5 seed this year, just knocked out of the tournament. People were saying Arizona was a really good team. They were underseeded because of these investigations. I don't necessarily think that the investigation necessarily had to do with this year's tournament issues. However, these are teams that when it comes down to it, it's a lot easier to say, look, we're not going to put this team in because the FBI is going against them, whereas you have a team like Syracuse that right now, after a couple of years of having issues with the law and what's going on with the NCAA, is now not having those issues. All of a sudden, it's a lot easier to put them into the big dance.
Right, and when Syracuse had those issues with the law, as you said, Jim Boeheim was, punished. He had wins vacated, all that type of stuff, because he is the head coach, and they said, he's the overseer of this program. So head coaches being the overseer of their basketball programs, can we expect any of them to be charged through this investigation?
I think in particular, Sean Miller of Arizona is going to get a lot of heat from this investigation. The FBI apparently caught him on wiretap, talking about paying the top recruit in the country, DeAndre Ayton, $100,000, and it'll be interesting to see whether he has his job in the next year, maybe even in the next few months.
And one other person I just wanted to point out is in Louisville, Rick Pitino already lost his job, and that was a big thing, and the replacement for him also is not going to be keeping his job. But the main thing is that we're seeing now teams starting to crack down on this, and with Kentucky also as another school, John Calipari's run a program that's very much based on freshmen, and people are starting to question, maybe this has to do a little bit with these investigations.
Yeah, and big conversation. This conversation has always been on the table, but I feel like it's been heating up with this investigation. Paying NCAA basketball players, they're student athletes, but they do put in a lot of work, and some people are arguing they should be paid. How do you think, this conversation is going to go moving forward?
Well, the NCAA still believes that student athletes, their education is more important than becoming paid right away. We already know that they receive so many benefits. Colleges are paying full tuition. In fact, their entire equipment is paid for. In the Olympics, teams, their equipment costs thousands and thousands of dollars. Nobody pays for their equipment specifically. So the fact that these college students are getting so many benefits already drives the argument that should they be getting paid on top of that?
Any of you guys think that it's ever going to happen?
I think it's
but
just difficult because you're looking at players, especially in college basketball. A lot of the talk now is the one and done. You mentioned DeAndre Ayton getting paid $100,000. Well, next year he's going to be getting paid millions of dollars. So
Yeah.
the thing is, for the NCAA, do they want to start paying players, or do they want to get rid of the rule that says you have to go to college before you go to the NBA so that players can be getting paid earlier on in their career? Or in the other case, they could say, you know what, you have to stay for longer in the NCAA. Take advantage of the fact that you are a student athlete. I mean, it's mentioned all the time that most people that are playing in these college athletics are not going on to be professionals. It could be very helpful.
That's true. Very few.
And it could be even one injury. I mean, take DeAndre Ayton. We keep mentioning his name. If he gets one career-ending injury, all of a sudden, guess what? All that money is going away, and now he has to find a way to get another job. That's why it's so important to be a student in these facilities. That's what the NCAA is arguing.
And just going forward, all three of you, where do you see this conversation shifting next season in terms of scandals, paying players, NCAA ethics? Where's the conversation heading?
I think we're going to see what happens a lot over the next few months. Obviously, this investigation is not complete, and the NCAA still has to decide if it's going to hand down any sanctions, and if so, which ones. So it'll take a little time to see whether this is going to impact possibly next year's tournament, some head coaches' jobs, and some player eligibility.
As for paying players, the topic always comes up, especially during investigations like these, especially now during March Madness. Once March Madness kind of fades away, once it ends, the question on should players be getting paid, it will still be there, but it might just get pushed a little more under the radar. And of course, it could definitely pop up once the new season starts.
And one of the other things is that the NCAA is always heavily criticized, not exactly the cleanest organization. Well, they just made over $1 billion in profits for the first time in their history in the past year. So now people are going to be wondering, you know what, where does this money go to? And should it be profited by members of the NCAA, or instead possibly go to the players that they're getting all their money off of?
Yeah, well, it'll certainly be interesting to see what happens in the off season. Guys, thanks so much for joining me. And that's all the time we have on this Talking Points webisode. For more Talking Points content like full shows, articles, and webisodes, visit citrus.com and follow us on Twitter at CitrusTV News. Be sure to tune in next Thursday for a brand new episode of Talking Points. For Matthew Wieselthier, Brandon Ross, and Justine Murray, I'm Gilat Melamed.